John, here to give you the latest on the current conditions out there this lovely Wednesday afternoon for much of the eastern side of the United States. The temperatures have been cooler than normal. We also have this upper level low that's sitting up here right now in the northeast, spinning showers down around the upper level low that is up in the northeast right now. And that is to continue for the next couple of days. Also down in Florida, scattered showers and thunderstorms, typical summertime stuff down in Florida. Also have some scattered showers here in North and South Dakota. I will get to the SPC Outlooks in just a few minutes because I think that area, along with Montana again, are in the risk for severe weather again. Some spotty showers here in Colorado and Utah, and showers and thunderstorms here in Arizona, which has caused 1-inch diameter hail to fall, and a frontal system out here in the Pacific Northwest with another shot of cooler air is coming down from the northern Pacific, which is causing some showers in the Seattle region today. As I always do, I look at these as you guys are seeing them. So the SPC outlook for today shows a slight risk of severe thunderstorms today for much of eastern Montana down into northwestern South Dakota and much of western North Dakota, with a marginal risk surrounding that goes all the way down into much of Colorado, northwestern Kansas, western Nebraska, and all the way up into the Dakotas today. The hazards. There is a less than 2% chance of tornadoes today, so tornadoes will not be the primary mode. However, there is a 15% chance of wind exceeding 60 miles an hour in the slight risk region, and a 5% risk around the marginal risk area. There's also a hatched area here in western North Dakota and eastern Montana, where winds could gust as high as 75 miles an hour. As far as the hail outlook for today, 15% chance of hail in the slight risk area, with a 5% chance along in the marginal risk area for today. As we go into the SPC outlook for tomorrow, there is a couple marginal risk areas. One here in eastern Colorado, northwestern Kansas, and much of central and western Nebraska. And also here in North Dakota, in the eastern part of North Dakota and western part of Minnesota and the far northeastern part of South Dakota. The hazards tomorrow, less than 2% chance of tornadoes, so tornadoes will not be one of the hazards. Wind, I'm going to change this to red. 5% chance of winds exceeding 60 miles an hour here in the first marginal risk area, and here in the other marginal risk area. And as far as hail, also just a 5% risk of hail in the marginal areas. As for Friday, as of right now, there's just a marginal risk out for a couple of areas here in Utah, southwestern Wyoming, and western Colorado, and a band here from eastern Montana down through western South Dakota, far southwestern North Dakota, and much of eastern Nebraska. So those are the SPC outlooks for the next couple of days. Here we go. So the rainfall outlook. Get this off here. There is a slight risk of flash flood guidance being met here today in Arizona and southwestern Utah, with some of the showers and thunderstorms that are going to develop. And there's a marginal risk surrounding that going from Southern California all the way east to northern Kansas and southwestern Nebraska. For tomorrow, again, slight risk of flash flood guidance being met here in the Four Corners region, and a marginal risk surrounding that going into far western Nebraska and much of Colorado and the western half of New Mexico. And for Friday, come on. God. There we go. Just a marginal risk of flash flood guidance being met here in the Four Corners region. So we will go into temperatures. Let's see, we're going to do models. Okay. Take a look at the GFS for this. This is the wind pattern. I got to turn some stuff off real quick. So this will be clear. We're going to change this to temperatures. There we go. And then we're going to change this to, let's see, 3, that'd be 2 o'clock. Yeah, that's good. So this is the air temperatures as of 2 o'clock. Cooler 50s up here in the Northeast, 60s and 70s through the rest of the Northeast, 70s and 80s for the Mid-Atlantic down into the Southeast, 90s and 100s, especially in Texas, 90s in Florida. You got 90s up here in the Wyoming, Nebraska, South Dakota, Montana area, and we have, with this front coming into the Northwest, we have cooler 50s, 60s, and 70s in the Northwest, while the deserts stay hot. Highs in the 100s. As we go into, well, heck, we'll go into tonight. 5, 8, 2. We'll go into tonight. Wow. So 40s and 50s. In much of the Great Lakes and Northeast regions, 50s and 60s down in the Southeast. Cooler 40s, some 30s in the higher elevations here in the Northwest, while Florida has lows in the 70s, as well as Texas, a few 80s, and 70s and 80s in the desert Southwest. 11-2. So we go into tomorrow afternoon. High temperatures will recover some. So instead of the 40s and 50s, we see 50s and 60s through the Northeast. Primarily 70s and 80s along the Mid-Atlantic and Southeast. 70s and 80s in Florida. 80s and 90s and 100s here in the plains into Texas and back into Mississippi and Louisiana and Arkansas. 90s, 100s, maybe a couple of 1-teens in the desert Southwest. Pockets of 90s here in Idaho. 60s and 70s west of this line coming in, and the valley floor in California will start to heat up into the 90s and possibly low 100s. 8, 11, 2. So for tomorrow night, again, 40s and 50s widespread. Great Lakes into the Northeast and parts of the Mid-Atlantic. 60s and 70s in the Southeast. 60s and 70s also in the Northern Plains. Cooler 40s and a few 30s in the higher elevations here in the Northwest. And also in higher elevations in Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. While lows 70s and 80s in Texas and the desert Southwest. As we go into Friday afternoon, highs will be, now Northeast starts to warm up a little bit, so now we got instead of 50s and 60s, we got 70s and a few 80s down the Northeast. 70s and 80s again down the Southeast. South Florida would be in the 90s. 90s and 100s. And a few 1-teens possible here in the desert Southwest and Texas, Oklahoma, southern Kansas. 90s start to spread into Mississippi. 90s go all the way up into eastern Montana and Dakotas. While the Northwest stays cool with some 40s in higher elevations, but primarily 50s and 60s along in the western part of Washington and Oregon. While Central California has highs in the 80s and a few 90s. As we go into Friday night, the 40s are starting to retreat a little bit now, so we got 40s and 50s, primarily just in the Northeast. 50s and 60s now in the Great Lakes. 60s primarily in the Southeast. 70s in Florida. Lows in the 70s and possibly a few 80s in the plains. And higher elevations. Go to see an outside shot of seeing some 20s in the higher elevations in California. Primarily it's 30s, 40s, and 50s in the Northwest. As we go into the day on Saturday, highs start to recover a lot. So now we're back in the 70s and 80s here in the Northeast, 70s and 80s down the Southeast, a few 90s in Florida. The heat builds in the central part of the nation with 90s, 100s, and a possibility of a few 1-teens with heat indices probably in the mid-1-teens. 90s and 100s down in the desert Southwest. Cooler 50s, 40s, and 50s here in the interior Northwest. While the rest of the interior Mountain West sees highs in the 70s and 80s. As we go into Saturday night, still a few 40s lingering in the Northeast interior, but 50s and 60s in the Mid-Atlantic Southeast, 50s and 60s in the Great Lakes. God, I can't think today. 70s for overnight lows, some 80s. Possible in Kansas. Lows 70s and 80s here in the desert Southwest. And in the interior portions of the Intermountain West, 30s and 40s widespread in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, western Montana, and northwestern Wyoming, with possibility of a few higher peaks dipping into the upper 20s. As we go into Sunday, high temperatures. Now the northeast rebound, so primarily along the East Coast, 70s and 80s will be common. Central part of the nation, 90s, 100s. And again, maybe a few 1-teens in the Central Plains. Texas starts to cool down a bit instead of hundreds and 100-teens. Primarily 90s in the western part. 90s and a few 100s in the desert Southwest. 40s and 50s now are just confined to northwestern Montana, few parts in Idaho, and some of the higher elevations here in Washington State. While 60s and 70s dominate the interior Mountain West. And for Sunday night, come on. Mouse doesn't want to work with me tonight. So Sunday night, few pockets of 40s, but 50s in the Northeast, 50s and 60s in the Southeast, 70s in South Florida for lows. These are low temperatures. 70s, and a few places may not get below 80 in Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and southern South Dakota. Again, 70s and 80s for lows in the desert Southwest. And 40s and 30s. 30s and 40s for the interior Mountain West in the higher elevations. 50s in the valleys. 60s and 70s in pockets in the interior Mountain West. So now I will go over some model guidance. We'll start with the GFS. Oh, I'm already on that. We will go to, let's see. We'll go through the Supercell Composite Index for today. We're up here. We have values in the mid-range down here. So some supercells may be possible that will cause damaging winds and large hail. And maybe a few splotches up here into Montana for, oh crap. Let's try this again. So we're going to go into late afternoon. That's right. Here we go. So Supercell Composite has high values here in western South Dakota. So there could be some supercells here also in eastern Montana here. This will cause some significant winds and large hail. Could get a couple of random storms there in Oklahoma and possibly along the Gulf Coast for this afternoon. As we go into tomorrow, This is a Supercell Composite Index. So basically, the brighter the color, the higher chance of supercells. So not much in the way of, you might get one or two supercells up here, but not banking on it. Maybe one or two over here. And then your higher index values are down here in Texas and the Red River. So a few of these may become supercellular and primarily have wind and hail with some of those storms tomorrow, and maybe one or two here in Florida, but I wouldn't bank against that. For Friday, you have a higher chance of having supercells here in Oklahoma, which could cause large hail and damaging winds. Maybe one or two here in northwest Kansas into northeastern Colorado and western Nebraska. Maybe one here up in northeastern Montana, and possibility exists here in Minnesota, western Minnesota, and eastern North Dakota. And that's for Friday. As we go into Saturday, the Supercell Composite Index is showing some supercells developing here in eastern Nebraska, far southwestern Iowa, and into northwest and central Missouri. And also there's higher values here in northeastern Oklahoma. So the chances of supercells developing up in North Dakota are lower, but increase through here. So damaging winds, hail, maybe an outside chance of a tornado for Saturday with the higher values. As for Sunday, come on. Oh, this is that. Okay. So this is Sunday. So for Sunday, again, some supercells possible in central Missouri. Also here in Iowa, southern Minnesota, and eastern South Dakota as we go into Sunday. Again, wind and hail being primary threats, but can't rule out tornadoes, and with the supercellular composite index showing higher values. And you might get one or two scattered about here in the Mid-Atlantic and in the southern New England states on Sunday. More on that to follow. So I will go into the helicity values, and we'll start it off for this afternoon. Again, the helicity the helicity index is the amount of the ingredients coming together to create some spin, possibly. So the possibility of tornadoes. There's some here in eastern Montana. We have some higher values here in South Dakota. And we also have higher values here in Oklahoma and down along the Gulf Coast of Texas. So there could be some rotating storms out there. Again, as far as the SPC outlook is just wind and hail, but can't rule out an isolated tornado for this afternoon. As we go into tomorrow afternoon, not much in the way of not much in the way of rotating storms. Maybe one or two down here in Texas. Maybe one in South Dakota, but odds are probably not. Just going to be just a batch of storms with damaging winds and hail. We go into Friday. Now we get the helicity value starting to spike here into Oklahoma. So you probably have some rotating pop-up storms along with possibly a supercell or two that could be capable of producing large hail and damaging winds, and possibly an outside chance of a tornado here in Oklahoma on Friday. As we go into Saturday, the threat shifts more to the north and east. So the higher helicity values are here into southwestern Iowa and much of western Missouri. Primarily, probably a few supercells embedded into a line or a cluster, which could create damaging winds and large hail. And also there's a little spike here into northeastern Oklahoma. Again, with the higher AHI values, can never rule out a chance of a tornado in this kind of situation. And as up on Sunday, the values aren't as high as Saturday, but still you got a few areas here in eastern South Dakota, western Minnesota. Then you got a band here, probably from a squall line kind of event here in eastern Iowa and far southern Minnesota, and a few splotches here in central Iowa. And then you have your highest values here in central Missouri, which could indicate a more of a cluster mode, more of a squall line mode with embedded supercells that could create damaging winds and large hail, and can't rule out a isolated tornado in this situation. Let's see. I'll do one more. What other goodies I can show you? Oh, we'll show you the climatological outlooks for the next 6 to 10 days. Um, Primarily, the Northwest will be cooler than average, while much of the rest of the United States will be warmer than normal, where the Great Lakes and the Mid-South will be the most above average in that time period. As we go to 8 to 14 days, again, warmer than average through much of the country, with cooler than normal here in the northern plains. As far as precipitation is concerned, precipitation next 6 to 10 days be drier than normal here in the Tennessee Valley into southern Great Lakes region, and also here in the Northwest. Wetter than normal conditions here in the northern tier, back down into Arizona, and also here in southern Florida and much of the Gulf Coast of Louisiana and Texas. For the 8 and 14 day outlook for precipitation, it will be wetter than normal here along the East Coast, drier than normal through the Tennessee Valley into the Midwest, also here in the Northwest, and wetter than normal here in the Central Rockies into the Central Plains. That is all I have for today. I hope everyone has a great Wednesday afternoon, and I hope to talk to you again soon.